9 True Scary Gas Station Horror Stories. There's something about gas stations at night that just doesn't sit right with most people. Maybe it's the isolation, the way the fluorescent lights buzz in the dark, the way sound seems to carry farther than it should when there's nothing else around. Or maybe it's the simple fact that when you're at a gas station, especially a remote one, you're vulnerable. Your car is stopped, you're out in the open, and anyone who happens to pull up next to you, well, you don't know them. You don't know where they've been. You don't know what they want. Tonight, I have 9 stories for you. 9 accounts from real people who stopped at a gas station and left with something they never asked for. A memory that still wakes them up at night. Some of these people were alone. Some had people with them. None of them were prepared for what happened. Turn the lights down, get comfortable, and whatever you do, don't go out for gas tonight. Story 1. The Man at Pump 7. Cole was 23 years old the night this happened. He was driving back from visiting his cousin who lived about 4 hours away in rural Tennessee, a stretch of highway that's mostly dark fields, tree lines, and the occasional farmhouse. He'd left his cousin's place later than he planned, and by the time he realized he was running on fumes, it was just past midnight. He pulled off the highway at an exit he didn't recognize. The sign said there was a gas station about a quarter mile up the road, and sure enough, he saw the glow of the lights from the road. The place was called Henny's Stop, one of those old, locally owned stations that look like they haven't been updated since the 80s. 2 pump islands, a small attached convenience store, a hand-painted sign in the window advertising boiled peanuts. Cole pulled up to Pump 3. He was the only car there, or so he thought. He got out, swiped his card, and started filling up. The night air was thick and humid, the kind of southern heat that doesn't really let up even after dark. He leaned against his car and looked around. Fields on one side, trees on the other. The highway was barely visible from where he stood, just the orange glow in the sky from passing headlights. Then he noticed the car at Pump 7. It was a dark green sedan, old, maybe a late 90s model. The kind of car that's so common it's practically invisible. The engine was off. No one was at the pump. Cole assumed someone was inside the store, so he didn't think much of it. He pulled out his phone and started scrolling while the gas pumped. But after a minute, something made him look up again. He wasn't sure what it was. Maybe a sound, maybe just a feeling. When he did look up, there was a man standing at the front of the green sedan, just standing there. Not pumping gas, not walking toward the store, just standing completely still in the shadow at the edge of the pump island's light, staring at Cole. Cole's first instinct was to look away. He did. He stared at his phone, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, and when he glanced up again 30 seconds later, the man had moved. He was now standing between the 2 pump islands, maybe 15 feet from Cole, still staring. The man was tall, probably 6'2", 6'3", wearing dark clothes and a baseball cap pulled low. Cole couldn't see his face clearly from where he was standing. The man hadn't said a word. Cole's gas pump clicked off. He grabbed the nozzle, put it back in the holder, and started to get into his car. That's when the man spoke. "Hey, you got a minute?" Cole stopped. He turned and looked at the man. "What's up?" he said, trying to sound casual. "I'm broke down," the man said. His voice was flat, calm in a way that felt off. "My phone's dead. I just need to use yours for a second, make one call." Cole hesitated. He'd been in situations like this before. It happens on road trips. But something about this felt wrong. The man hadn't walked toward the store to ask for help. He'd watched Cole. He'd waited until the pump clicked off, until the exact moment Cole had one foot ready to get in the car before saying anything. "Sorry, man, I can't," Cole said.
He got in the car and locked the door. The man didn't move. He stood there as Cole started the engine. He stood there as Cole put the car in drive. He was still standing there, in the same spot, perfectly still, as Cole pulled out of the lot and back onto the road. Cole watched him in the rearview mirror until the gas station disappeared behind a curve. He drove for about 10 minutes before he pulled over on the side of the road to calm down. His hands were shaking, and he wasn't entirely sure why. He didn't have a concrete reason to be afraid. The man had asked to borrow a phone. Lots of people asked to borrow phones. But here's the thing that sealed it for Cole. When he pulled back onto the highway and got his breathing under control, he passed a rest area about 2 miles up the road. There was a payphone there, one of those old blue ones mounted on a post under a yellow light. He saw it as he drove past. If that man had really needed to make a phone call, the rest area was 2 miles from where he was standing. He could have walked there in under an hour. And if his car was truly broken down, he could have asked the attendant inside to call a tow truck from the store's landline. But instead, he'd waited in the shadows. He'd watched, and he'd waited for the exact moment Cole was alone and about to leave before making his move. Cole got home that night and sat in his car in the driveway for a long time before going inside. He never found out who that man was. He never went back to find out. And to this day, whenever he fills up at night, he parks where he can see every other car on the lot. Every single one.
Story 2. The Attendant Who Saved Her Life. Donna is a nurse, and like most nurses, she's used to long, exhausting shifts that blur into one another. The night this happened, she was driving home from a double shift, 16 hours at the hospital, and she was running on fumes in every sense of the word. It was around 2 in the morning when she pulled into a 24-hour gas station just outside the town where she lived. She'd stopped there dozens of times before. Familiar place, bright lights. A young guy named Pete usually worked the overnight shift, and he always waved at her when she came through. This night, she pulled up, got out, and started pumping. She was so tired that she was basically on autopilot, standing at the pump, staring at nothing, just waiting for the numbers to tick up. She barely noticed when another car pulled in on the other side of her pump island. It was a white pickup truck, newer model. The driver got out and started pumping, and Donna barely glanced at him. She was too tired. She just wanted to get home. What she didn't notice, what she couldn't have noticed because she wasn't paying attention, was that the man had glanced at her the moment he got out of his truck. He looked at her car, looked at her, and then looked around the lot to see if there was anyone else there. There wasn't. Donna's car and his truck were the only ones on the lot. But Pete had noticed. Pete, the overnight attendant, had seen all of it from behind the counter through the big plate glass window. He'd seen the way the man had scanned the parking lot. He'd seen the way the man had parked, not at an empty pump, but at the one directly behind Donna's car, even though the lot was empty and he could have parked anywhere. And he'd seen the man reach back into his truck cab and tuck something into the waistband of his jeans before walking toward the pumps. Pete didn't hesitate. He picked up the store's phone, the landline behind the register, and he dialed 911 before anything else had happened. He told the dispatcher his address and said there was a suspicious male on the lot who appeared to be armed and was positioning himself near a lone female customer. Then he did something that Donna still calls the bravest thing anyone has ever done for her. He walked out from behind the counter, out the front door of the store, and called out to her across the parking lot. "Ma'am! Hey, ma'am! Sorry to bother you. I think your card got declined. Can you come inside for a sec?" Her card hadn't declined. Pete made it up on the spot. But Donna, being tired and not wanting a confrontation, pulled her nozzle out and walked toward the store without thinking twice.
The moment she stepped inside, Pete locked the front door. "Hey, what are you—" she started. "Just stay inside," Pete said quietly, nodding toward the window. "I called the cops. They're on their way." Donna looked through the glass. The man from the truck was still standing at the pumps, and now that she was looking at him properly, now that she wasn't half asleep, she saw it. The way he was standing, the way his right hand kept drifting back to his hip, the way he kept glancing at the store door. He stood there for about 2 minutes. Then a set of headlights appeared on the road, not a police cruiser, just a random car pulling in to get gas, and the man from the truck suddenly walked very quickly back to his vehicle and drove away, fast. Police arrived about 4 minutes later. They ran the plate on the truck. Donna never found out exactly what the man's history was. Pete told her later that the officers hadn't told him much, but she was told that they wanted to speak with him. She asked Pete afterward why he'd acted so quickly, why he hadn't waited to see if anything actually happened. He looked at her and said, "Because by the time something happens, it's already too late." Donna cried in her car on the way home that night, not from fear exactly, but from the strange, disorienting feeling of realizing how close things can come without you ever knowing. She still stops at that gas station. She always goes inside to say hi to Pete.
Story 3. What was in the bathroom? This one was sent to me by a guy named Trevor. He was 19 at the time and was on his way back from a camping trip with 2 friends. They'd been out in the woods for a few days, and by the time they reached civilization, Trevor was absolutely desperate to use a real bathroom. They stopped at a gas station off a rural highway, one of those sparse stretches of road in the Midwest where there's just nothing for miles. The gas station was open, but barely. The parking lot was cracked and weedy, the paint's peeling. One of the 2 outside lights was dead, leaving half the lot in darkness. Trevor's friends waited in the car while he ran inside. The attendant, an older woman who barely looked up from her magazine, waved him toward the back when he asked about the bathroom. The bathroom was around the side of the building, accessed through an exterior door. It was a single-stall, unisex bathroom, just a toilet, a sink, a flickering light, and that particular smell of a gas station bathroom that you just have to accept. Trevor went in, locked the door, and did his business. He was washing his hands when he heard it. Breathing. Slow, steady, deliberate breathing, coming from inside the bathroom. But he was alone. The stall door was open. He could see there was no one in it. The sound seemed to be coming from the corner near the paper towel dispenser, but there was nothing there, just a wall. Trevor turned off the faucet and stood completely still. The breathing was still there, even, unhurried, and close, like someone was standing right next to him. His first thought was that it was the ventilation system. Old gas station bathrooms have all kinds of weird sounds from old pipes and vents. He told himself that, and he almost believed it. Then the breathing changed rhythm. It slowed down, and then, after a pause, it came back at a different pace, like whatever was making it had noticed that Trevor had gone still, like it was adjusting, like it was listening. Trevor left. He didn't run. He wanted to run, but his legs went tight and shaky, and the best he could do was walk fast. He came around the side of the building, opened the passenger door, and got in. "Everything okay?" his friend Mikey asked. "Drive. Right now, just drive." Mikey looked at him. "We're not done pumping. Please, man, drive." Mikey pulled the nozzle out without finishing, and they left. Trevor told them what happened as they drove. His friends were skeptical. They offered all the rational explanations, and Trevor agreed with all of them, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling. Here's the part that still bothers him.
About 2 weeks after the trip, Trevor was telling the story to a co-worker, and his co-worker said something that made him go cold. "Did you check the ceiling?" Trevor hadn't. He'd never thought to look up. The bathroom was one of those older ones with drop ceiling tiles, the removable kind, and the co-worker pointed out that people have been known to hide in drop ceilings of gas station bathrooms. It's not common, but it happens. Trevor went quiet for the rest of that workday. He doesn't know what was in that bathroom. It might have been nothing: bad pipes, overactive imagination, the jittery paranoia that comes with being overtired on a long road trip. He tells himself that all the time. But he also tells himself he's never going into a gas station bathroom alone at night again. And so far, he's kept that promise.
Story 4. The Same Face Twice. This story comes from a woman named Renee. She was 29 at the time and worked as a long-haul courier. She drove her own vehicle, not a rig, and made deliveries across a wide region, usually with packages that had to be delivered in person. Most of her routes were fine, routine, but one particular run took her through a part of the state she wasn't familiar with, and it's a run she still thinks about. It was late afternoon going into evening when she stopped at a gas station to fill up and grab coffee. The station was on the edge of a small town, 2 pump islands, a diner attached to the side, a couple of semi-trucks parked along the back. Normal enough. She filled up, went inside, got her coffee, paid. As she was walking back to her car, she noticed a man sitting in a gray sedan parked along the side of the building. He was just sitting there, engine off, staring forward. She glanced at him. He was probably in his mid-40s, heavy-set, short gray hair, wearing a blue flannel shirt. She noticed him the way you notice anyone who's just kind of there, and then she forgot about him the way you forget about everyone you pass in a gas station parking lot. She got in her car, pulled back onto the highway, and drove. About 45 minutes later, she pulled off the highway again, this time at a larger truck stop to use the bathroom. She found a parking spot, got out, went inside, used the bathroom, bought a bag of chips, and walked back out. And there was the gray sedan, parked 3 spots down from her car. Same car, she was almost certain. Same scuff on the front bumper. Same parking sticker in the lower left corner of the back windshield. Renee stopped walking. She stood there and stared at the car. After a moment, the driver's door opened and the man in the blue flannel shirt got out. He looked at her. His expression didn't change, no recognition, no reaction, just a flat, neutral look. He walked past her into the truck stop without a word. Now it's possible, it's entirely possible, that this was just coincidence, 2 people leaving the same small gas station and ending up at the same truck stop 45 minutes later. It happens. Roads funnel people into the same places. But Renee is a courier. She spends her life on the road. She knows how timing works on highways. And the fact that she had stopped for 10 minutes at the first station, then driven 45 minutes at highway speed, and yet this man, who she'd watched sitting still in his car when she left, had ended up at the same truck stop at almost exactly the same time, meant that either he'd driven very fast to catch up to her, or he'd been behind her the entire time and had gotten off when she got off. She didn't use the bathroom at the truck stop. She got back in her car and drove. For the next hour, she watched the rear-view mirror. She changed lanes constantly to see what the traffic behind her did. She took an exit she didn't need to take, drove around a gas station she didn't need to stop at, and got back on the highway.
all just to see if she was being followed. She never spotted the gray sedan again, whether that means he was gone or just far enough back that she couldn't see him, she doesn't know. She called her dispatch when she finally reached her delivery location and told them she was spooked and needed a minute. They gave her one. She sat in a parking lot in the early evening and didn't move for 15 minutes. She still drives that route, but she doesn't stop at those same gas stations anymore. She takes a different exit and adds 20 minutes to her drive. 20 minutes, she says, is a small price to pay.
Story 5. Don't take the free candy. This one was submitted by a father named Garrett. He was traveling with his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, just the two of them on a long drive to visit family. His wife had flown ahead, and Garrett was driving because Lily had always been afraid of flying. They stopped at a gas station in the late afternoon, somewhere in rural Georgia, the kind of place surrounded by pine trees where there's nothing for miles, and the only sign of civilization is the faded billboard for the station about a mile before you reach it. Garrett got out to pump gas while Lily stayed in the back seat, watching something on a tablet. He leaned through the window to check on her. She waved at him without looking up, and he went to handle the pump. He was mid-fill when a woman came out of the convenience store. She was probably in her 50s, casually dressed, nothing out of the ordinary. She walked over to the car and knocked on the rear passenger window. Garrett looked up immediately. He was about 30 feet away. The woman smiled at Lily through the glass and held something up, a piece of candy, still in its wrapper. She said something. Garrett couldn't hear exactly what, but from the gesture she was offering to give Lily the candy. Lily looked up from her tablet, looked at the woman, and then looked over at Garrett like she was asking permission. Garrett walked over, not jogging, walking, but very purposefully. "Can I help you?" he said. The woman turned to him, still smiling. "Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to scare anyone. I just love kids. I've got grandkids about her age. I picked this up inside and thought she might like it." She held out the candy. It was a well-known brand, still sealed in the original wrapper, completely normal on the surface. Garrett looked at her. He looked at the candy. He looked at his daughter, who was now watching both of them with open curiosity. "That's really kind of you," he said, "but we're all good, thanks." The woman nodded, still smiling, and walked back to the store. Garrett finished pumping, and they left. In the car, Lily asked him why he'd said no to the candy. Garrett thought for a second. "Because we don't take things from people we don't know, even if it seems nice." It was the same rule he'd always taught her, and he'd meant it as a simple reminder. But here's what happened later that pushed this story out of the back of his mind. About an hour up the road, Lily fell asleep. Garrett, driving in silence, found himself replaying the interaction at the gas station. There was something about it that was nagging at him, and he couldn't place it for a while. Then he realized. The woman had come out of the convenience store, but when Garrett had looked over at the sound of the knock on the window, she'd been standing at his car, not walking toward it. She'd been there almost immediately after coming out of the store, meaning she'd walked directly, purposefully to their specific car. There were 3 other cars on that lot. She had come to his car. She had gone to the window where his 8-year-old daughter was sitting alone. She had not tried to wave Garrett over or acknowledged him until he walked toward her. She doesn't know what she intended. Maybe she really was just a friendly grandmother with a pocket full of wrapped candy. Maybe there was nothing sinister about any of it.
but he drove the rest of the way to his family's house with his hands tight on the wheel. And when he got there and hugged his wife, he held on a little longer than usual.
Story 6. The Night Shift That Went Wrong. This one is from Eddie's own experience working at a gas station. He was 20 at the time, working the night shift at a station in a mid-sized town in the Pacific Northwest. It was a job he'd taken to help pay for community college, and for the most part, it was quiet. Regulars coming in for cigarettes, truckers stopping for energy drinks, the occasional drunk person stumbling in for chips. It was quiet until the night a man walked in who didn't want to buy anything. It was around 3 in the morning on a Wednesday, the deadest stretch of the week according to Eddie. He was restocking the refrigerated section in the back of the store when he heard the bell above the door. He came around the aisle to greet the customer and stopped. The man was standing just inside the door, not moving. He was wearing a dark hoodie with the hood up, jeans and boots. He had his hands stuffed in the front pocket of the hoodie. He wasn't looking at the shelves. He was looking at the register. Then he looked at Eddie. Eddie had been told in training that if he ever felt unsafe, he had the right to ask a customer to leave. He'd also been told that the register had very little cash in it, they did drops throughout the night, and that the security camera was recording. And he'd been told that if anyone ever tried to rob him, his job was simple. Give them what they want, don't be a hero, and call the police once they're gone. He remembered all of that, and yet... The man took a step forward. "You here alone?" he said. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. Eddie didn't answer right away. He'd been taught not to lie, but also not to confirm information that could be used against him. "What can I help you with tonight?" he said. The man looked at the register again, then back at Eddie. "Just you in here?" "Is there something I can help you find?" Eddie said again, louder this time. The man seemed to register that Eddie wasn't going to answer his question. He tilted his head slightly, just looked at Eddie for what felt like a very long moment. Then he turned and walked back out the door. Eddie stood completely still until he heard the sound of a car starting and pulling away. Then he went behind the counter, sat down on the little stool back there, and didn't move for 3 minutes. He called his manager, who told him he'd done the right thing and that these things happen sometimes and not to worry about it. Eddie wasn't worried exactly. He was something else, a hollowed-out, shaky feeling that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite okay. He worked the rest of his shift. But here's the part that got under his skin in the weeks that followed. He started looking back at the store's security footage from that night. He had access to it as an employee. And when he found the footage from the parking lot camera, the one that faced outward toward the pumps in the street, he saw that the man's car had been parked across the street, not in the lot, across the street with the headlights off. It had been there for 40 minutes before the man came inside. 40 minutes of watching the store, of waiting, of watching Eddie work through the plate glass windows, alone in the fluorescent light at 3 in the morning. Eddie gave 2 weeks' notice the following Monday. He says he doesn't regret it. Story 7. The Wrong Turn. Priya was 26 and new to driving long distances alone. She'd recently moved from the city to a town about 3 hours away for a new job, and she was still figuring out the routes. One weekend, she drove back to visit her family, and on the way home, it was around 10 at night. Her GPS rerouted her due to a highway closure and sent her down a state road she'd never been on. The road was dark and winding, cutting through forest for miles. She passed almost no other cars. When her gas light came on, she felt a cold jolt of anxiety. She hadn't thought to fill up before the detour. She was relieved when she saw the gas station sign about 5 miles up the road. The place was small, one pump island, a single-room store, a flickering yellow light above the door. The lot was empty when she pulled in. She got out and started the pump. The night was very quiet, just the hiss of the gas, the chirp of insects, the occasional creak of the trees. She kept her keys in her hand and stood close to her car. The door to the convenience store opened and a man came out. He was short, older, wearing coveralls, and he nodded at her. "Evening," he said. "Hi," she said. He walked around to the side of the building without another word, and she heard the sound of a door opening and closing back there, probably a storage room or a bathroom. She exhaled, just an attendant doing his rounds. A minute later, the pump clicked off. She got the receipt, got back in the car, and headed back out to the road. She drove for about 20 minutes before something made her check her phone. She had a text from her mom. Her mom had tried calling twice while she had bad reception, and the text read, "Baby, call me when you get this. Your cousin posted something on Facebook about that road you might be taking. Something about that gas station. Call me." Priya called her mom right then, pulling off onto the gravel shoulder. Her cousin, it turned out, had seen a local news story shared in a community Facebook group. A gas station on that stretch of state road had been flagged by county police after multiple women had reported that the attendant had been copying down their license plate numbers and looking up their registration information. He'd used that information to track down personal addresses. Police were asking anyone who'd stopped there recently to contact them. Priya sat on the side of that dark road for a moment, processing this. She'd given the man nothing. She hadn't gone into the store. She hadn't spoken to him other than a one-word greeting. She hadn't left her window down. But her license plate had been right there, 2 feet from where he'd walked when he'd come out of the store. She called her mom back and told her she was fine. She drove home without stopping. She called the county sheriff's non-emergency line the next morning and gave her her license plate number and the time she'd been at the station. The deputy she spoke with thanked her and told her to let them know if she received any unexpected contact. She hasn't yet, but she checks her surroundings a little more carefully now, and whenever she stops at an unfamiliar gas station, she keeps her back to the plate. Story 8. He wasn't there when we left. This one comes from 2 brothers, Theo and Danny, who were 24 and 21 at the time. They were driving across the country, one of those classic road trip ideas that sounds great when you plan it and becomes exhausting about day 3. By the time this happened, they were on day 4, somewhere in the high desert of New Mexico, and they were tired, bored, and riding on caffeine. They stopped at a gas station that was attached to a diner, the kind of combo that you find out in the desert, because if you're going to make money in the middle of nowhere, you'd better give people more than one reason to stop. They pulled in around 9 at night, filled up, decided to eat at the diner because they were sick of drive-thrus. They were in the diner for about an hour. Decent food, slow service, a couple of locals at the counter who talked to the waitress the whole time. Normal, comfortable. They paid, tipped, and walked back out to the lot. Danny reached the car first. He stopped. "Hey," he said to Theo, "Wasn't that guy there when we got here?" He was pointing to a man sitting on the low concrete barrier at the edge of the parking lot. The man was facing away from them, looking out toward the highway, sitting very still. Theo tried to remember. He honestly wasn't sure. They'd parked and gone straight into the diner. He hadn't paid much attention to the lot. "Maybe," said Theo. "So what?" "We were in there for like an hour," Danny said quietly, "and he's just sitting there in the same spot." They both looked at the man. He hadn't moved. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't eating or drinking anything. He was just sitting on that concrete barrier with his back to them, perfectly still. "Come on," Theo said, and they got in the car. As Theo started the engine, Danny turned around and looked through the rear window at the man. Still there, still not moving. Theo pulled forward, then swung around toward the exit, and as he did, his headlights swept across the barrier, and for just a second the man was lit up. He turned his head toward the light, just slightly, not all the way, not like a person turning to look at a car, just a small involuntary tilt, the kind of movement that made it look less like he was watching the headlights and more like he was listening to the engine. Neither of them said anything until they were back on the highway. "That was weird," Danny finally said. "Yeah," Theo agreed. They drove in silence for a few minutes. "What do you think he was doing?" asked Danny. Theo shook his head. "Don't know." "How long do you think he'd actually been there?" They thought about it. The diner, the hour inside, the fact that he'd been there when they arrived, the fact that he hadn't moved the entire time. "Too long," Theo said. "He'd been there too long." They didn't talk about it much after that. It was one of those things you can't really explain and can't really prove was anything. A man sitting in a parking lot. That's all it was, technically. But here's what Danny told me. A few weeks after the trip, he was telling the story to a friend, and the friend asked an obvious question. Was the man's car in the lot? Danny thought about it. He thought back to pulling in, parking, walking into the diner. He tried to remember the other cars. He couldn't remember seeing a car near the barrier where the man was sitting. He couldn't remember seeing a car that obviously belonged to that man anywhere on the lot. No one walks out to the high desert. He doesn't know what that means. He's not sure he wants to. Story 9. The Last Customer. I want to end tonight with this one, because out of everything I've heard, this one is the hardest to shake. It comes from a woman named Vera, and she shared it with me through a message that took her, by her own account, 3 attempts to actually finish writing. She said it wasn't because it was difficult emotionally. It was because every time she got close to the end, she started doubting whether she should share it at all. She changed her mind and sent it anyway, and I'm glad she did. Vera was 32 and lived in a small town in West Virginia. She was driving home late from a friend's get-together. Not drunk, she was clear about that. She'd stopped drinking early in the evening and had been drinking water for hours. She was just tired. It was after midnight, and the back roads between her friend's house and her own were dark and winding, the kind you have to know well to drive confidently. She stopped at a gas station she'd been using her whole life, literally her whole life. She remembered her parents stopping there when she was a little girl. The owners had changed a few times over the decades, but it was always there, a fixed point. She pulled in and saw the lights were on inside, but there was no one at the pumps. She got out, swiped her card, and started filling. It was quiet.
The kind of quiet that only happens at that hour in a small town. No highway noise, no distant music, just the soft sound of wind and the mechanical hum of the pump. The door to the store opened, and a girl came out. She was maybe 16, 17, light blue hoodie, jeans, sneakers, brown hair pulled back. She walked toward the pump island and stopped a few feet from Vera's car. She looked at Vera. "Excuse me," the girl said. "Could you give me a ride? I need to get home." Vera looked at her. "Where do you live?" The girl gave a street name. It was one Vera knew, maybe 10, 12 minutes from where they were standing. Vera was a cautious person, but she was also, at her core, kind. And this was a young girl, alone at a gas station after midnight, in a small town where most people knew each other. "Okay," Vera said. "Get in." She finished pumping while the girl stood there, then they both got in the car. Vera asked if she was okay. The girl said she was fine, just needed to get home. Vera asked how she'd ended up at the gas station. The girl said she'd been walking and stopped because her feet hurt. It was a perfectly normal conversation. The girl was polite, seemed fine, made eye contact, asked Vera a couple of questions about herself. Nothing strange at all. Vera pulled up to the address the girl had given. It was a house on a residential street, dark the way all the houses were dark at that hour. Porch light on, one lit window upstairs. "Is this it?" Vera asked. "Yes," the girl said. "Thank you so much. You're so nice." "Of course," Vera said. "Get inside safe." The girl got out of the car. Vera waited until she saw her walk up the porch steps, and then she pulled away. She drove home, went inside, and went to bed. 2 days later, Vera was at a neighbor's house for coffee. The neighbor had lived on that street her whole life and knew every family in the area. Vera mentioned in passing that she'd given a girl a ride from the gas station the other night, just making conversation. "What did she look like?" the neighbor asked. Vera described her, light blue hoodie, brown hair, 16 or 17. She gave the street and house number. The neighbor set down her coffee cup. "Vera," she said slowly, "you know what family lives in that house." "I don't think I know them personally," Vera said. The neighbor looked at her for a long moment. "There's only one person living in that house. Harold. He's in his 80s. He lost his wife 2 years ago, and both his kids moved away. He lives alone. There's no teenage Pearl." Vera didn't say anything. "And," the neighbor continued carefully, "there was a girl who used to live in that neighborhood a long time ago, before you would have moved here. She used to walk everywhere. Everyone knew her. She died in an accident on that road out by the gas station when she was 17. Vera drove to that house later that day. She sat outside it for a long time. It was exactly as the neighbor had described, an old man's house, clearly. No signs of a teenager, no sneakers by the door, no evidence at all of a young girl. She drove to the gas station. She went inside and asked the attendant, a young man she half recognized, if he'd seen a girl there 2 nights ago, late around midnight. Brown hair, blue hoodie. He shook his head. "I was here till close," he said. "I don't remember anyone like that." Vera stood there for a moment. "Was the store locked that night, after midnight?" He nodded. "We close at midnight. Lock the doors." The girl had come out of a locked store. Vera got back in her car. She drove home. She sat in her driveway for a very long time, thinking about the conversation in the car. Perfectly normal, friendly, real feeling in every possible way. Thinking about the porch steps and the soft sound of footsteps on wood. She never heard the door open. She never heard the door. Gas stations. Most of us pass through them dozens of times a year without a second thought. We pump our gas, we grab our coffee, we get back on the road. But tonight, 9 people reminded us that not every stop goes the way it's supposed to. That the person watching you from the shadows might not be what they seem. That sometimes the most dangerous moment of your night is the one you almost don't notice. Drive safe, pay attention, and next time you pull into a gas station late at night, look around before you get out. You never know who might already be watching.
9 true disturbing night shift security guard horror stories from Reddit. There is something about working alone at night that changes a person. Most people never have to find out what really happens in those empty buildings after everyone goes home. The hallways that felt perfectly normal at noon take on a completely different feel at 3 a.m. Shadows seem thicker. Every sound carries. Your own heartbeat becomes something you are suddenly very aware of. Security guards know this better than anyone. They walk those halls, they sit in those booths. They watch those cameras for hours and hours waiting for nothing until something finally shows up. These are 9 stories shared on Reddit by people who worked the night shift as security guards. Some of them quit after what happened. A couple of them are still not sure what they saw. All of them say the same thing, that after that one night, they were never able to look at an empty building the same way again. Get comfortable. Turn the lights on if you want. It probably will not help. Story 1. The Wet Footprints. Derek had been working mall security for about 2 years when it happened. It was a Wednesday night in January, slow season, bitter cold outside. The kind of night where the parking lot was completely empty by 9 and you could hear your own footsteps echoing off the tile floors all the way down the main corridor. He liked those nights, honestly. Less foot traffic, fewer problems, fewer teenagers to chase out of the food court. Just him, his radio, and the hum of the fluorescent lights. The mall he worked at was a big one, 3 floors, 2 anchor stores, maybe 140 shops total. After closing, the security team did a sweep in pairs and then split up to cover separate wings for the rest of the night. Derek usually got the east wing, the older half of the mall that had been partially renovated about 6 years ago. Half of it was modern and clean. The other half still had that late 90s feel. Darker lighting, older tile, a row of stores that had been sitting vacant for almost 3 years waiting on a lease deal that never seemed to close. He liked to do a full walk at midnight, 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. That was his routine. The midnight walk was completely normal. He went through the east wing, checked the gate locks on every store, tested a few doors, shone his flashlight into the vacant units just to be sure. Nothing, dead quiet, except for the usual ambient hum of the building, the HVAC system, the distant buzz of signage, the creak of the structure settling in the cold. 2 a.m. was when things changed. He was about halfway down the vacant corridor when he noticed it. Footprints, wet ones, tracking across the dry tile floor, coming from the direction of the emergency exit at the far end of the hall and heading toward the center of the mall. He stopped and stared at them for a second. His first thought was that someone had propped the emergency door open, come in from the cold, tracked snow inside. It happened occasionally, usually homeless individuals looking for warmth. He got on the radio and let his partner on the west side know what he was seeing. His partner said he would make his way over. Derek followed the prints slowly, hand on his radio, flashlight sweeping the corridor ahead of him. The prints went about 40 feet and then just stopped. Not at a door, not at a store entrance, not at a bench or a kiosk. They just stopped in the middle of the open walkway, as if whoever had been making them had simply ceased to exist mid-step. Derek stood there for a moment looking at that last print. It was a full boot print, left foot, and there was no right footprint beside it, no indication that the person had turned around or backtracked. The prints leading back toward the emergency exit were still there, going in one direction only.
He told himself it was a trick of the lighting. Maybe the person had dried off. Maybe there was a vent overhead that blew the remaining moisture off their shoes. He looked up. There was no vent. His partner arrived about 4 minutes later, and they checked the emergency exit together. The door was locked from the inside. No sign of tampering, no water near the door, no snow tracked in around the threshold. Nothing. The only moisture in the entire corridor were those footprints that ended in the middle of the hall. They wrote it up as an anomaly and finished the shift without incident. But Derek said the 4 a.m. walk was when it really got to him. He was doing his routine check of the vacant units, shining his light through the security gates into the empty stores when he got to the second-to-last unit on the row. He had passed this particular empty store probably 300 times. It was dark, it was empty, the floor was dusty. There was an old cardboard sign in the window from when the previous tenant had closed down. That night, when he shone his flashlight through the gate, he saw something in the back corner of the store. It was a person, standing completely still, facing the wall. Derek said his entire body went cold. He grabbed his radio, got his partner on the line, and told him to get to his location. He kept the flashlight on the figure, watching it. It did not move, did not react to the light, just stood there, face to the wall, still as a statue. His partner arrived in under 2 minutes. They both stood there looking at the figure. His partner started to call out, standard protocol, identifying themselves, telling the individual to turn around. No response. They called for the supervisor to come open the gate. The supervisor arrived with the keys and they slid the gate up and went inside. The store was empty. Not just empty of people, it was empty of everything, including the dust, because right where the figure had been standing, the floor had been completely wiped clean in a perfect circle about 3 feet across. Dusty everywhere else, clean right there. Derek requested a transfer to the West Wing the following week. He finished out his time at that mall, but he never did another 4 a.m. walk through the vacant corridor alone. He said the thing that bothered him most, more than the footprints, more than the figure, was what he found when he went to clock out that morning. Inside his locker, which had been locked all night, was a small piece of folded notebook paper. He unfolded it. It was a child's drawing, done in red crayon, of a figure standing in the corner of a room. He never found out who put it there.
Story 2, Aisle 7. Nolan worked the overnight shift at a distribution warehouse on the outskirts of a mid-sized city in Ohio. The building was massive, one of those sprawling single-story structures that covers nearly the area of 3 football fields, filled wall to wall with industrial shelving units stacked 20 feet high, all loaded with inventory. During the day, the place had a full crew of pickers, loaders, supervisors, and forklift operators. At night, it was just Nolan, and on some nights, a second guard named Pete who covered the loading dock side of the building. Nolan's side was the interior, the shelf aisles, the dark ones. He had been there about 8 months when the incidents in Aisle 7 started. It was not dramatic at first, just small things that pulled at the back of his mind. A pallet that seemed to be in a slightly different position than it had been an hour before. A box on the floor that he was almost certain he had seen up on the shelf when he passed through earlier. Things that had easy explanations. Forklifts were running all day, things got bumped, inventory shifted, normal stuff. But the cameras started acting up around that time too. Not all the cameras, just the 2 that covered Aisle 7. The overnight supervisor for the camera room was a woman named Gloria who sat in a little glass booth near the main entrance. She told Nolan about it casually one morning as their shifts were overlapping. She said the Aisle 7 cameras had been cutting out for 30 to 40 seconds at a time, usually between 2 and 4 in the morning, and that the tech team had been out twice and could not figure out why. Nolan asked her what the cameras showed right before they cut out. She paused a little too long before she answered. She said they showed normal aisle footage, the shelf rows, the overhead lighting, nothing out of the ordinary. But then she added something almost under her breath. She said that right before each cutout, in the last few frames before the feed went black, there was something at the very far end of the aisle. She described it as a shape, tall, just standing there at the end of the row. She said she assumed it was a worker who had stayed late or a shadow from the shelving catching the light wrong. She filed it with the tech report and moved on. Nolan started paying more attention to aisle 7 after that. He began keeping a log of the times he walked through it and what he observed. Most nights, nothing, but on 3 separate occasions over the following 2 weeks, he found signs that someone had been in that aisle. The first time, it was a partial boot print in a thin layer of dust along the base of a shelf, too large to be his, pointing in the wrong direction. The second time, it was a small collection of empty food wrappers pushed neatly behind a pallet near the back wall, granola bar wrappers, the kind you could buy at any gas station. The third time, it was worse. The third time, it was a voice. He was at the far end of aisle 7 near the back emergency exit when he heard it. A man's voice, low and calm, coming from somewhere in the middle of the aisle. It was not words exactly, or if it was, he could not make them out. It sounded like someone talking quietly to themselves. He called out, identified himself. The voice stopped immediately. He swept the entire aisle, both sides. He checked the shelf levels with his flashlight, peering up into the stacked inventory. He checked the floor. Nothing. The aisle was empty. He got on the radio with Pete and told him what happened. Pete came over and they walked the aisle together this time. Still nothing. They reported it to management the next morning. A full search of the warehouse was conducted that afternoon before the day crew clocked in. Security found a concealed space behind a double-stacked wall of pallets near the middle of aisle 7, a gap about 4 feet wide and 8 feet deep that you wouldn't notice unless you were specifically looking for it. Inside the gap, they found a sleeping bag rolled up, a backpack, several days' worth of food wrappers, a battery-powered lantern, and a spiral notebook. The pages of the notebook were filled with handwriting, dates, times, observations. Whoever had been living back there had been watching the warehouse. They had logged the security patrol schedules, the camera positions, the shift changes. They'd been living in that aisle for what management estimated was at least 3 weeks. The space was empty when they found it. No sign of where the person had gone. Management installed new cameras and increased patrol frequency. They never identified who it was or how they had gotten in and out of a building that was kept locked and alarmed every night. Nolan quit 2 weeks later. He said it wasn't the fear of whoever it was coming back. It was the notebook. Specifically, it was the last entry, which was dated the morning of the day they found the hiding spot. It just said one thing. It said, "They know."
Story 3. The Patient in the Basement. Vince worked hospital security at a large regional medical center for 4 years. He wants to clarify up front that hospitals at night are always a little unsettling. That is just the nature of the environment. You have the sounds of machines, the occasional alarm, staff moving quietly through corridors, the awareness that somewhere in this building people are very sick or in pain. It is not like working a mall or an office building. There is a weight to it. But even accounting for all of that, what happened during the 3rd year of his time there was something else entirely. It started with the access logs. The medical center had electronic keycard access on every restricted area: stairwells, the pharmacy, the surgical floors, the basement level where storage, mechanical rooms, and the morgue were located. Each swipe was logged with a timestamp and a card ID. Routine stuff. Security reviewed logs when there was a reason to, and otherwise they just lived in the system. A facilities manager named Ron flagged something to Vince's supervisor in early spring. He said the basement stairwell access door on the east side of the building had been registering an unusual number of entries during the overnight hours. Entries that did not match any of the staff schedules. Not the cleaning crew's hours, not the morgue transport team's hours. The entries were coming in between 3 and 5 in the morning, consistently 3 to 4 nights a week. The card ID logging the entries came back as belonging to a patient wristband scanner, a handheld device used on one of the inpatient units upstairs. The device had been reported missing 6 weeks earlier and never turned up. Vince started spending time in the east stairwell basement area during the 3 to 5 window. For the first week, nothing. He would position himself near the door and just wait. The door never opened. Then, one night, he was not watching the stairwell. He was doing a sweep of the ground floor corridor when he saw him. A man in a patient gown standing at the end of a hallway near the pharmacy corridor. Just standing there, facing away from Vince, completely still. Vince called out the standard identification, announced himself as security, asked the individual if they needed assistance. The figure turned its head slightly, not fully, just enough to show it was aware of being addressed, and then walked around the corner. Vince followed immediately. When he came around the corner, the corridor was empty. He searched that entire wing for 45 minutes. No patient. He checked with the nursing stations on every floor, described the individual, tall, thin, older patient gown, no visible ID band on the wrist. Nobody had a missing patient. Nobody had a patient matching that description anywhere in the building. He saw the figure 4 more times over the next 3 months. Always at night, always in a patient gown, always somewhere it should not be. A maintenance corridor, the back hallway near the service elevator, the loading dock. Always just standing, always turning slightly when addressed, always gone by the time Vince got within 20 feet. He started calling him the Wanderer in his own head. The thing that resolved it, and the thing that haunts him most, happened on a Tuesday in late June. A plumbing issue in the basement required facilities to open a utility room that had not been accessed in over a year. It was a large mechanical space off the main basement corridor, full of old HVAC equipment and conduit runs, not used for anything active. When Ron and his crew opened it that Tuesday afternoon, they called security immediately. Someone had been living in that room. Not recently, the evidence suggested months of occupation, possibly longer. There was a mattress on the floor, worn down and flattened with use. Candles burned down to their bases, wax pooled on the concrete. Several changes of clothing, including 3 folded hospital gowns. Food packaging that went back at least 6 months based on the expiration dates. An overturned crate being used as a table, with a small mirror propped against the wall. There was no active way in or out of the room that they could identify. The only door was the one facilities had just unlocked. Vince walked the entire room himself, checked every wall, every piece of equipment, looking for a secondary passage. He found none. Whoever had been in that room had not used the door to leave, because the door had been locked from the outside, from a lock that had not been opened in over a year. The hospital brought in investigators. They identified the clothing, but were never able to identify who the person was or how they had accessed the space. Vince never saw the figure in the patient gown again after that room was found. He thinks about the mirror sometimes, about whether that person was watching themselves in it or watching something behind them.
Story 4, Extension 2206. Priya had only been working at the building for about 6 weeks when the phone call started. She was a night security officer at a 34-story office complex downtown, one of those glass tower buildings full of law firms, financial companies, and corporate suites. During business hours, the place had maybe 2,000 people in it. After 7 p.m., it was her, one other guard named Curtis who covered the lobby and loading dock, and a cleaning crew that finished their run and was out by midnight. After midnight, it was just her and Curtis. The building had an internal phone system, the old kind, where every office and suite had a desk phone hardwired into a building-wide PBX. Most of the companies had their own phone systems layered on top of it, but the building infrastructure was still there underneath. Priya had a phone at the security desk in the lobby, and it showed extension numbers when incoming calls came through. The first call came on a Thursday night, just after 1 in the morning. Her lobby phone rang with an internal extension. The display read 2206. She answered. Nothing, just a faint sound, almost like air moving through a space, and then the line went dead. She assumed it was a misconnect, maybe an alarm in one of the suites triggering something in the old phone infrastructure. She noted it in the log and moved on. It happened again the following Monday,
same extension, same time, just after 1 a.m. This time she stayed on the line for almost a full minute, listening. The sound was still there. She described it as breathing, but not quite right, too slow, too even, like a recording of breathing rather than a real person. Then the line went dead again. She mentioned it to Curtis during their check-in. He looked up extension 2206 in the building directory. Floor 22, Suite 2206, a commercial real estate firm. He said he would check with building management about whether the firm had any late-staying employees. Building management came back the next day with something that made Priya's stomach drop. Suite 2206 was currently under full renovation. The suite had been vacant for 4 months. More importantly, the renovation had involved a complete communications infrastructure overhaul. All the old phone lines in that suite had been physically cut and removed. There were no active phone connections in Suite 2206. The renovation crew had confirmed this the previous week. Priya brought this back to Curtis. They agreed she would check it out. She took the elevator to floor 22 on a Friday night around 1:15 a.m. The hallway was dark. The renovation crew had pulled the overhead lighting as part of the build-out, so only the emergency exit lights were on, casting everything in a low red glow. The air smelled like fresh drywall and sawdust. She could hear the distant hum of the building around her. Suite 2206 was at the end of the hall. The door was unlocked, standard during active renovations. She pushed it open and swept her flashlight around inside. The suite was a shell. No walls between offices, just the open floor plan with framing studs, plastic sheeting, bare concrete floors. No furniture, no equipment, just raw construction space. And on the floor, in the middle of the suite, was a phone. It was an old desk phone, the kind that must have been 15 or 20 years old, gray plastic, the coil cord hanging loose. It was sitting on the bare concrete floor, and the cord was not connected to anything. Both ends, the wall jack and the handset cord, were just dangling free. She stared at it for a long moment. Then it rang. She said later that she stood there for 3 full rings before she reacted. The sound was completely absurd. A physical phone, no connections, no power source, ringing in a gutted office suite at 1 a.m. She finally reached out and picked up the handset. The breathing was there again, that slow, even, wrong breathing. She said she tried to speak, managed to get out a single hello, and then the breathing stopped and the line went entirely silent. Not even a dial tone, just silence. She set the handset down, walked back to the elevator, rode it to the lobby, sat down at the security desk, and did not move again until Curtis came to check on her 20 minutes later. The phone was removed by the renovation crew the following Monday. The foreman said he had no idea where it came from. It was not part of their equipment and should not have been in the suite. Priya transferred to a daytime position 2 months later. She still thinks about those calls. Specifically, she wonders who or what was on the other end.
Story 5. The Silver Sedan. Colt took the night security job at the downtown parking structure mostly because the pay was decent and the hours were quiet. He had worked customer-facing jobs for most of his 20s and was tired of dealing with people. A parking garage at night seemed like the perfect antidote. 6 floors, 800 spaces, mostly empty after 10 p.m. He patrolled the levels on foot every 2 hours and spent the rest of the time in the booth at the entrance, watching the cameras. The Silver Sedan appeared on a Tuesday. He noticed it during his patrol. Level B, spot 4, a silver 4-door midsize, no front plate. He could not make out the rear plate from his angle and made a note to check it properly on the next round. He had not seen it come in during his shift, which started at 10. Either it had come in before he started or he had missed it on the camera. Both were possible. The next morning when the day guard came in, Colt mentioned the car. Day guard said he would keep an eye on it. When Colt came back for his shift that evening, the car was still there. Second night, same spot, same car. No one had touched it. He walked up to it this time and checked the rear plate. There was no rear plate either, just the mounting holes.
He looked inside through the window. Empty. Nothing on the seats, nothing on the dash, nothing in the back. Clean interior, clean glass. The car looked almost new. He ran the vehicle description up to his supervisor, who said they would contact the towing company if it was still there after 72 hours. Third night. Still there. Colt was doing his 2 a.m. patrol on level B when he noticed something different about the car. The exhaust pipe. There was a faint shimmer of heat coming off it, barely visible, but he was close enough and the garage was cold enough that he caught it. The engine was running. He stood there for a moment, hand on his radio, watching the car. The interior looked exactly the same as before. No one visible in any seat, no glow of a phone or any interior light, just a running car sitting in a parking spot, completely dark inside. He called it in to his supervisor, was told to approach with caution and to wait for backup before engaging. His backup was another guard named Theo, who covered the adjacent building and could be there in 10 minutes. Colt stood about 15 feet from the car and watched it. The exhaust was still shimmering. There was no condensation on the windows. Inside and outside temperature must have been equalized, which meant either the car had been running for a very long time or the heater was on. Theo arrived. They approached the car together, one on each side. Colt shone his flashlight through the driver's side window. Empty. Completely empty. All 4 seats, the floor, the back seat, the rear window ledge. Nothing. No one. But the engine was definitely running. They could feel the heat from the hood, hear the faint idle vibration. Colt tried the driver's door. Locked. They called the police. A patrol unit arrived about 20 minutes later. The officers ran the VIN through the window. The VIN plate on the dash showed a number, but when they ran it through the system, it came back as belonging to a completely different vehicle, a pickup truck that had been totaled in another state 3 years prior. One of the officers tried to Slim Jim the lock so they could reach in and kill the engine. Before he could get the door open, the engine stopped on its own, just cut off like someone had turned a key. They got the door open. Fully empty interior, cold engine, not running cold, not just turned off cold, stone cold, like the car had been sitting parked and off for hours. On the dashboard, weighed down by a single quarter, was a folded piece of paper. The officer unfolded it. He turned and looked at Colt with an expression Colt said he will never forget. The note had 3 words on it, just 3 words, Colt's first name written at the top in handwriting he did not recognize, and beneath his name in the same handwriting, I see you. The silver sedan was towed and processed. No fingerprints inside, no DNA, no usable evidence of any kind. The case was listed as a vehicle abandonment with a mismatched VIN and filed away. Colt started parking his own car in a different spot every night. He still checks his rearview mirror more than he used to.
Story 6. The Exhibit That Moved. Tamara had landed what she initially considered one of the cooler night security gigs available, overnight guard at a natural history and Civil War museum in a medium-sized southern city. The museum was beautiful. 3 floors, thick stone walls, soaring ceilings, glass display cases full of artifacts going back hundreds of years. She liked being around old things. She liked the quiet. She figured it would be peaceful. She was right for the first 2 months. The Civil War exhibit occupied most of the 2nd floor. It was an immersive space. Low mood lighting, period music piped in softly through hidden speakers during museum hours, and at its center, a large diorama featuring 8 life-size mannequins dressed in period-accurate uniforms and civilian clothing, posed in a realistic scene depicting a field hospital from around 1863. Soldiers in various states of injury, a doctor figure, a woman in period dress. Tamara did not like that exhibit at night. She could not explain it exactly. It was the mannequins, obviously. Mannequins at night are uncomfortable for everyone. She would be the first to admit that. But it was something beyond the standard unease. It was the feeling,
each time she walked through that the poses were slightly different from the last time. She told herself she was imagining it. She told herself she was not paying close enough attention during her first few passes and was now second-guessing herself. Then the motion sensors started going off. The Civil War room had 4 motion sensors, 2 near the entrance, 1 over the main diorama, 1 near the back display cases. They were linked to an alert system that paged her tablet when triggered. For the first 2 months, they never went off during her shift. Then, in the 3rd month, the one over the main diorama started pinging, reliably between 2 and 3 a.m. Every time she went up to check, the room was empty. Every time the mannequins looked, she thought, slightly different. The field doctor figure seemed to be facing a few degrees more toward the entrance than before. The woman in the period dress seemed to have her chin slightly more tilted. Nothing she could prove. Nothing she could point to definitively and say, that changed. She started taking photos. Every time she entered the room, she photographed all 8 mannequins from the same angle. She built up a reference library on her phone over the course of a few weeks, time-stamped, same position in the doorway each shot. When she compared them side by side, there were differences. Not large, dramatic differences, not the kind of thing that would look obvious to anyone else, but the kind of thing that when you lay the photos next to each other in sequence showed a clear and undeniable progression. The field doctor figure had moved. Over the course of 3 weeks, across maybe 11 documented photographs, the figure had rotated approximately 25 degrees. The woman in the dress had shifted her weight. She was a rigid mannequin. She should not have had weight to shift, but something about the angle of the hips had changed. Tamara took her photo documentation to the head of operations, a man named Gerald who had been with the museum for 20 years. Gerald was skeptical. He suggested the cleaning staff might be accidentally nudging them during their weekly wipe-down of the display area. He suggested the motion sensors might be going off from HVAC airflow. He was very reasonable and very unhelpful. She kept documenting. The night it ended her time at the museum was a Saturday in March. She did her 2 a.m. round of the 2nd floor and took her reference photo of the Civil War exhibit. 8 mannequins, same poses as the previous night. She continued her patrol, went back downstairs, spent an hour at the security desk, and then went back up for her 4 a.m. round. She stepped into the Civil War room and swept her flashlight across the diorama. 7 mannequins. The field doctor figure was no longer in the diorama. She stood in the entrance of that room for what she said felt like a very long time, but was probably only about 10 seconds. Then she turned and looked at the security camera mounted in the far corner of the room, the camera that recorded everything and fed back to the security desk downstairs. The field doctor mannequin was standing directly beneath the camera, face up, looking directly into the lens. She called the police. She called her supervisor. She did not go back into that room. The mannequin was found, after an extensive search, back in its position in the diorama by the morning staff arrived. Security footage from the camera covering the Civil War room from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. showed nothing, complete static. The camera had malfunctioned during the exact window in question. Tamara turned in her notice the next morning.
Story 7. What's in the Pit? Brett took the construction site security job as a temp position while he was waiting on something better to come through. It was supposed to be 3 months. Just watch an empty lot, log arrivals and departures during the day crew, and then sit in a trailer booth from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., making sure nobody walked off with equipment or copper wire. Boring. Fine. He needed the money. The site was a future mixed-use development on the edge of downtown, a big pour of underground parking garage and residential units, currently in the early foundation phase. Most of the lot was open dirt and machinery. At the center was the pit, about 30 feet deep, maybe 100 feet across, the raw beginning of what would eventually be an underground structure. It was surrounded by chain-link fencing with warning signage and a few work lights mounted on poles around the perimeter. At night,
With the sight lights on, the pit was visible from the guard trailer, a dark square hole in the ground with harsh white light ringing the edges. Brett started hearing the voices about 2 weeks into the job. Children's voices, coming from the direction of the pit. The first time, he convinced himself it was a radio left on somewhere. The second time, he went to check and found nothing. The pit was empty, the perimeter fence was locked, there was no radio, no one around. The voices, laughing, just children laughing, had stopped by the time he reached the fence. He mentioned it to the day crew foreman, a heavy-set man named Bill. Bill looked at him for a moment and then said something that stuck with Brett. He said the property they were building on had been a city park in the 1940s and 1950s, and before that it had been something else, something older, that he did not want to get into. He told Brett to just ignore any sounds from the pit. Brett tried, but the sounds continued, 2 or 3 nights a week, always between midnight and 3 a.m. Sometimes laughter, sometimes what sounded like a single child calling out for something, not words he could make out, just tone and cadence, a child calling in the way children call when they want something. Sometimes silence, but a kind of heavy silence, like the silence right after a sound stops. Then the toys started appearing. The first one he found on a Monday morning, tucked against the base of the chain-link fence on the pit's north side. A small rubber ball, faded yellow, the kind you could buy out of a grocery store bin for $1. He tossed it in the equipment trailer's trash, did not think much of it. 2 nights later, a stuffed animal, a worn teddy bear with button eyes, sitting upright against the fence. He photographed it and reported it to his supervisor, who said kids must be getting on site somehow and to increase his perimeter checks. Then a plastic toy truck, then a child's shoe, just one, a small sneaker, tied to the fence with its own lace. He was doing this carefully now, photographing everything in place before touching it, logging the time and location. His supervisor had stopped responding to his reports with any urgency. He was starting to feel like he was the only one taking this seriously. The last item appeared on a Thursday night. He found it during his 3 a.m. perimeter walk, a stuffed rabbit, white with one ear torn half off, sitting at the fence line just like the others. He photographed it, reached down to pick it up, and noticed something tucked into the tear in the ear. A folded piece of paper. He opened it. It was a photograph, a printed photo, slightly faded like it had been out in the weather for a while. It took him a moment to understand what he was looking at. It was his guard trailer, his chair visible through the window, the sight lights in the background. The photograph was taken from outside the fence, at night, looking toward the trailer. Specifically, it showed his trailer at exactly the angle you would have if you were standing at the pit fence on the north side of the site, the exact spot where all the toys had been left. He was in the photograph, sitting in his chair inside the trailer, visible through the window, with the light on. The timestamp printed on the photo margin showed a date and time from 3 weeks before Brett had started the job. He called his supervisor from the site, voice shaking, and refused to remain on location without a second guard present. The company sent someone out within an hour. Both of them searched the perimeter and found nothing. Construction was halted briefly the following week when workers excavating the deeper foundation levels reported finding what appeared to be very old structural debris, brickwork, foundation stones, personal objects, none of it matching the site's documented history. Brett left the job that week. He did not take any security work for almost a year after that. He still has the photograph. He has never been able to explain the date on it.
Story 8. The Yearbook.
Owen had worked the overnight security shift at the university library for almost 3 years. It was a good job for someone who liked reading and did not mind silence. The library was a big one, 5 floors, hundreds of thousands of volumes, a basement archive, and a 24-hour study room on the ground floor that stayed open but was monitored by desk staff. His job was to make sure only authorized people were in the restricted sections after hours, and to patrol the floors every 90 minutes. He had seen plenty of students sneak up to the closed floors to study or sleep or whatever. He'd run people out of the stacks more times than he could count. None of that bothered him. What started bothering him in the fall of his 3rd year was the automated book return system. The building had a book drop station on the ground floor where people could return materials after hours. A slot in the wall, books went into a bin, the system logged each return with an RFID scan. Simple enough. The log showed entries with timestamps, and Owen would check it as part of his routine. Starting in October of that year, the system began logging returns between 2 and 4 in the morning, hours after the drop station was last used by actual patrons. Not every night, but 3 or 4 times a week. Owen checked the physical bin each time an alert came through. It was always empty. The log showed a return, but there was nothing in the bin. He brought it to the library's IT coordinator, who ran diagnostics and found nothing wrong with the system. She said it might be ghost reads, RFID interference from nearby materials causing false positive scans. She noted it for monitoring and moved on. Owen kept checking, and one night in November, he found something. When he went to check the book drop bin after a logged return, the bin was empty, but a book was sitting on the ledge beside the station, not in the bin, on the ledge next to it, placed neatly face up. He picked it up and looked at the cover. It was a university yearbook, 1987. He flipped through it briefly, brought it to the ground floor desk, and set it aside to turn in to the circulation staff in the morning. Old yearbooks sometimes circulated as reference materials. It was back the next night. Same ledge, same placement, same yearbook. He shelved it himself this time, walked it upstairs to the floor where the yearbook collection was kept, and put it back in its proper spot on the shelf. 3rd night, back on the ledge. He started paying attention to what was inside it. He sat at the desk during a quiet stretch of the night and flipped through it slowly. About halfway through, he noticed a page with a student photo circled in red pen, one of the underclassmen portraits, a thin young man with a serious expression. The name beneath the photo read G. Aldrin. Something made him look him up. He was not sure why, he just had a pull toward it, a feeling. He used the library's archive terminal to search the university's historical student records, which were partially digitized. He searched the name, Gordon Aldrin, enrolled fall 1985, disappeared from campus in March 1989, listed as a missing person, case never resolved. Owen sat with that for a moment. Then he went to the camera system and pulled up footage from the floors above, the floors he'd been patrolling all fall. He went back through weeks of overnight footage, not sure what he was looking for. On the footage from a night in early October, he found it. 3rd floor, history section, 2:47 a.m. A figure visible at the end of a long row of shelves, standing still. The image quality was not great, old cameras, low light, but the figure was there. Tall, thin, facing toward the camera. He searched other nights, found the figure on footage from 6 separate occasions, always the same floor, always the same section of shelves, always between 2 and 4 a.m. He'd patrolled that floor on all of those nights and had never seen anyone. He printed a still frame from the clearest piece of footage and took it back to the 1987 yearbook. He held the printed frame next to the circled photo of Gordon Aldrin. He put the yearbook down and did not pick it up again. He requested a reassignment to day shifts the following week, citing personal reasons. His supervisor granted it without question. The yearbook was not on the ledge again after that. Owen sometimes thinks about whether it had been waiting for someone to find it, to find him, and whether, now that someone had, Gordon Aldrin had finally gotten what he came there for.
Story 9. The Tenant in 4C. Lucia had been the overnight security coordinator at the Pembroke residential complex for about 18 months. It was a mid-rise apartment building, 12 floors, 240 units, mostly long-term tenants. Her job was less active patrolling and more monitoring, watching the camera feeds, responding to resident calls, logging incidents, occasionally walking the common areas and stairwells when something needed checking. It started with complaints. 3 separate residents on different floors reported the same thing within a 2-week window in the spring: a man in the stairwells. Always described the same way: tall, older, wearing dark clothing, standing very still. 2 of the residents said they had made eye contact with him and that he had not reacted, had not spoken, had just watched them go past. One resident, a young woman named Kelly on the 7th floor, said she had seen him twice in the same stairwell landing on different nights. Lucia reviewed all the stairwell camera footage for those dates and times. Nothing. She watched every minute of footage from every reported incident window and saw no one matching the description. The stairwells were empty. She logged the complaints and noted the camera review results. She expanded her monitoring to cover the lobby cameras, elevator cameras, and hallway cameras for the reported floors. She watched carefully for several weeks. She never caught the figure on any camera, but she started getting something else instead. In the hallway camera footage on the 4th floor, the one that covered the corridor between the elevator bank and the far stairwell, she started noticing a recurring detail. Between 2 and 3 a.m., several times a week, the elderly woman in Unit 4C would open her door and place something in the hallway just outside her door, a bowl or a small plate. Then she would go back inside. This happened consistently for about 3 weeks before Lucia decided to check on it. She did not want to alarm the resident. She was an older woman, had been in the building for over a decade, but leaving items in the hallway was a fire code issue at a certain point, and more importantly, Lucia was curious. She spoke with the woman during her day shift overlap, caught her at the mailboxes. The woman, her name was Elspeth, mid-80s, sharp eyes, polite but reserved, explained that she left food out for the man who visited. She said he came by most nights and she did not want him to go hungry. Lucia asked her to describe the man. Elspeth described him the same way the other residents had: tall, older, very still, dark clothing. She added one detail the others had not mentioned. She said he never spoke, but he always nodded at her when she opened the door, like he was grateful. Lucia asked Elspeth when she had first seen him. Elspeth thought about it for a moment and said she believed it was about 6 months ago. She said she had not thought to report it because he seemed harmless, and honestly, she said, she appreciated the company. That night, Lucia watched the 4th floor hallway camera with focused attention. At 2:22 a.m., Elspeth's door opened. The elderly woman placed a small plate of food on the floor outside her door, looked down the hallway, seemed to nod at something, and went back inside. She pulled the door mostly closed, but left it slightly open. Lucia watched the hallway. The plate sat there. The hallway was empty. At 2:31 a.m., the food on the plate was gone. Lucia rewound the footage and watched again. She watched it 4 times. The food was there, and then it was not. No one came down the hallway. No one approached the plate. Nothing moved in the camera frame between 2:22 and 2:31. But on the 5th time she watched it, she noticed something she had missed. At the very edge of the frame, right at the border of where the camera's field of vision ended, near the mouth of the stairwell, there was a mirror, a decorative mirror that one of the hallway residents had put up on the wall years ago. It was partially in frame. Lucia had never paid attention to it before. In the mirror, during those 9 minutes, there was a reflection. A tall figure,
standing near Elspeth's door, looking down at the plate. Lucia zoomed in as much as the footage would allow. The figure was there, completely clear in the mirror, visible from the torso up, standing right next to the door. There was no figure in the actual hallway, only in the reflection. She watched the footage from every previous night she had saved. Every night that Elspeth left food, the mirror told the same story. A figure in the reflection, nothing in the hall. Lucia notified building management the next morning and recommended a welfare check on Elspeth, who was found to be completely fine and was gently encouraged to stop leaving food in the hallway. Elspeth agreed without argument, but when the building manager explained that security had never found any evidence of someone in the building, Elspeth just smiled and said, "Well, some people don't leave evidence." The complaints about the figure in the stairwells stopped after that. Lucia kept the saved camera footage on a personal drive. She has never fully decided what she believes, but she does know this. On the night she pulled those mirror recordings, she went to the fourth-floor hallway herself and stood in front of that mirror. The mirror showed the empty corridor behind her. Her own reflection looked back at her. And just at the edge of her reflection, barely visible in the far corner of the mirror's surface, something was standing. She turned around immediately. The hallway was empty. She has never looked in that mirror again. And that is where we will leave it tonight. 9 stories from people who showed up for work one night and came home changed. Most of them moved on, took other jobs, tried to put distance between themselves and whatever it was they encountered. Some of them managed it better than others. But the thing about a story like this is that it doesn't really end, not for the person who lived it, not for the guard who still checks his rearview mirror in the parking lot, not for the woman who will not look in mirrors at work anymore, not for any of them. The next time you're in an empty building at night, or even a building you think is empty, pay attention to the mirrors. Pay attention to the places just outside your field of vision. Pay attention to the sounds that don't quite have a source. Some things don't leave evidence, but they are there. Thanks for watching. If you have your own story, drop it in the comments. I'll see you in the next one.
Hey there, and welcome to True Scary Stories. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling us where you're from and what time you're watching. That helps YouTube know you love creepy stories, and it'll keep sending more your way.
Hey everyone, and welcome back. If you're new here, you've stumbled onto the right channel, because tonight we're going deep, really deep. Night shift. For most people, it's just a schedule, a way to make ends meet. You clock in when the rest of the world is asleep, you do your job, and you go home. Simple enough, right? But the people in tonight's stories, they'd tell you something different. They'd tell you that something changes when the sun goes down and the building empties out. Something you can't really explain until you felt it yourself. That particular silence, that particular darkness, that feeling, that creeping, bone-deep feeling that you are absolutely, completely not alone. These are 6 stories from people who worked the night shift, and not a single one of them will ever look at it the same way again. Let's get into it. Story 1. The Overnight Stalker. His name was Derek, 24 years old, fresh out of a bad breakup and desperately in need of steady income. He landed a job as an overnight stalker at a large grocery store in rural Ohio, the kind of town where not much happens, the kind of place where you'd assume the scariest thing at 2 in the morning is boredom. Derek was wrong about that. The store closed at 10. His shift started at 11.
By the time he arrived, the parking lot was always empty, just his car and the 2 or 3 other cars belonging to his co-workers. The manager would let them in through the back loading dock, run through the night's task list, and then disappear into the office to do paperwork. For the first few weeks, nothing unusual happened. Derek would push his cart up and down the aisles, restocking shelves, listening to music through one earbud, counting down the hours. Tedious, sure, but manageable. It was a Tuesday night in late October when things changed. He was in aisle 7, the canned goods aisle, when he heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping, like knuckles on glass, except there was no glass nearby, just metal shelving and concrete floors. He pulled out his earbud and listened. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the far end of the aisle. He grabbed his box cutter, more out of instinct than logic, and walked slowly toward the sound. Nothing. The aisle was empty. The tapping had stopped. He chalked it up to the building settling. Old buildings made noise. He went back to work. But then, around 2 in the morning, he was pushing his cart past the refrigerated dairy section when he saw something that stopped him cold. The glass doors of the dairy coolers, all 8 of them, running about 30 feet down the wall, were completely fogged up on the inside, which was weird because the coolers were always cold. The glass never fogged from the inside. It fogged on the outside when warm air hit it, but never from inside. He stood there looking at it for a long moment, and then, slowly, almost like it was being drawn by a finger, a shape began to trace itself through the fog on the other side of the glass. It was a hand, a human hand, moving slowly, deliberately, tracing its outline into the condensation from the inside of the refrigerated case. Derek took a step back. His brain immediately jumped to the rational explanation. Someone was trapped inside the cooler. It happened, right? Someone got locked in. He grabbed the handle of the nearest cooler door and pulled. Cold air rushed out. He looked inside. Nothing but milk and butter, all neatly stacked. He checked every single cooler door one by one. They were all empty of people. He went and found his coworker, a guy named Travis, and told him what he'd seen. Travis laughed and told him the store was old and weird things happened. But Derek noticed that Travis didn't actually come back to look at the dairy section with him. The rest of that night passed without incident, but Derek couldn't shake the image, that hand, moving slowly, deliberate, like it wanted him to see it. 2 nights later, he was working alone in the back of the store, near the stockroom, when he heard footsteps in the aisle just outside. Clear, distinct footsteps. The kind of sound a person makes when they're walking on tile in hard-soled shoes. He peeked around the corner. The aisle was empty. The footsteps stopped. He told himself it was nothing. He went back to his cart. And that's when his phone buzzed. An unknown number. Just 4 words. I see you, Derek. He assumed it was a prank from one of his coworkers. He marched up to Travis and the other guy, a coworker named Ray, and asked which one of them had sent it. They both looked at him blankly. He showed them the text. Neither of them had his number in their phones. The manager, when he came out of the office, said it was probably someone who had his number from before, trying to mess with him. He shrugged it off and told Derek to get back to work. But there was one more thing, one thing that Derek never fully talked himself out of. At the end of that shift, as the crew was leaving through the loading dock, Derek glanced back through the small window in the door, the little rectangular window that let you see into the store from outside. Standing at the end of the center aisle, perfectly still, was a figure. Dark clothing. He couldn't make out a face, but it was standing there in the middle of the store at 5:30 in the morning in a store that had been locked since 10 o'clock the previous night. Derek grabbed the manager's arm and pointed. The manager looked through the window. The figure was gone. The manager searched the store, every aisle, the stockroom, the coolers, the bathrooms. He found nothing. No one. The alarm had never been triggered. The doors had all been locked from the inside. Derek quit the next day. He never went back for his last paycheck. To this day, he still gets the occasional text message from that unknown number. Always at night, always when he's alone. He never answers.
Story 2. The Security Guard at Millbrook Tower. Callum was 41 when he took the security job at Millbrook Tower, a 14-story office building in the Midwest that had seen better days. Half the floors were vacant. The company that had originally built it had gone bankrupt, and the new owners were slowly trying to lease it back out, floor by floor. In the meantime, Callum's job was simple: patrol the building once an hour, check that the doors were locked, sign the log, repeat. The building had 2 elevators and 1 stairwell. At night, the lobby lights were kept on low, and everything above the 3rd floor was dark unless Callum hit the switches manually as he did his rounds. He'd been doing the job for about 6 weeks when he first noticed the elevator. He was sitting at the lobby desk, watching the monitors, when he noticed that the elevator on the left, elevator A, was in motion. The display above the door was cycling through floors: 5, 6, 7. It stopped at 8. Callum frowned. He hadn't called the elevator. Nobody should be in the building. He called his supervisor, who told him it was probably a glitch. Old elevators did that sometimes, moved on their own, triggered by electrical surges or failing components. His supervisor told him to go up and check floor 8 and report back. Callum took elevator B up to 8. He stepped into a long, dark hallway. He hit the light switch. Half the fluorescent lights flickered to life. The other half stayed dark, making the hallway look striped with shadow. He walked the floor slowly. Empty office spaces, dusty carpet, cubicle dividers still standing from whoever had last occupied the floor, some of them still with faded papers pinned to them. The place felt like the Marie Celeste, like everyone had just stood up and walked away midday. He didn't find anything. He took elevator B back down, logged it as a mechanical issue, and went back to his desk. But it happened again the following night, and the night after that. Always elevator A, always stopping at floor 8. Callum started to develop a ritual around it. See the elevator move, go up and check, find nothing, come back down. It became almost routine, until the night he found the chair. He'd been on the job about 2 months when he went up to floor 8 for what felt like the 20th time. He walked the hallway, hit the lights, did his sweep. In the middle of the hallway, facing the elevator doors, was a single office chair, black, wheeled, the kind you'd find at any desk. It had not been there the night before. Callum was certain of that because he'd been up to this floor enough times to know exactly what was and wasn't supposed to be here. He stood in the hallway staring at that chair for a long time. He called his supervisor again. His supervisor said it was probably maintenance workers who'd been up during the day and left equipment behind. Completely reasonable. Callum logged it and went back to his desk. When he came back up an hour later during his regular patrol, the chair had been moved. It was now facing the window at the far end of the hall, still in the middle of the corridor, but rotated a full 180 degrees. He was alone in the building. He had not left the lobby in the intervening hour. Nobody else had come in. The entrance log was clear, and the cameras would have caught anyone entering. Callum stood very still for a very long time. He told me he felt a kind of fear in that moment that was different from ordinary fear. Not the sharp adrenaline spike of sudden danger, more like a slow, cold understanding. The feeling you get when you realize something is very wrong and you have no framework to explain it. He went back downstairs.
He sat at his desk for the remaining 4 hours of his shift without doing another patrol. He stared at the monitors. Elevator A did not move again that night. But here's the part that got to me when he told me this story, the part that he saved for last, almost like he wasn't sure he wanted to say it. He said that on one of the monitors, the one covering the lobby camera cast, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. Up near the ceiling, in the corner of the lobby where the camera had a blind spot, there were scratches in the drywall, like something had been dragged across it repeatedly over a long period of time. The scratches were too high up to have been made by a person standing on the floor. They were about 12 feet up. Callum finished out his contract at Millbrook Tower, but he requested a partner for his shifts. Management denied it. He refused to do his hourly patrols above the 3rd floor ever again. He logged every patrol as completed regardless. He told me he's pretty sure his supervisor knew something was wrong with that building. He's pretty sure everyone knew. He's just not sure exactly what it was.
Story 3. The Nurse on Floor 4. This one comes from a woman named Brianna, a registered nurse who worked the overnight shift at a small regional hospital in the southeast. She'd been a nurse for 9 years, was completely level-headed, not prone to exaggeration. She said she'd seen enough real tragedy in her career that she didn't scare easily. But Floor 4 scared her. Floor 4 was the long-term care wing. Patients who had been there for weeks or months, some with dementia, some recovering from major surgeries, some, she said this quietly, who were simply waiting. You understand what she meant by that. The floor had 16 rooms, a nurse's station in the center, and a long corridor stretching in both directions. At night, it was dimly lit. The machines beeped and hummed. The occasional patient would call out in their sleep. This was all normal. This was just the floor. What was not normal was room 412. Room 412 was, at the time of these events, unoccupied. The patient who had last been in that room had passed away about 3 weeks prior, an elderly man named Mr. Greer. His death was expected, not traumatic. He'd simply declined over the course of several weeks and passed in the night. As deaths on that floor went, it was a peaceful one. After his passing, the room had been cleaned and left empty, waiting to be assigned to a new patient. Standard protocol. But Brianna kept noticing things in that room. The first time, she was doing her late-night rounds and glanced through the window in the door of 412 as she passed. The room was dark, as expected. But the television, which should have been off, which should have been completely off in an empty room, had a faint glow to it. Not the bright glow of a TV that was on, more like the kind of glow you get when a screen has recently been turned off, a residual warmth. She noted it and moved on. Probably a power issue. She mentioned it to maintenance the next morning. Maintenance found nothing wrong. The TV was off, the room was empty. They checked the electrical and left. 2 nights later, she walked past 412 and the door was open. She was certain that she had closed it during her previous round. She was thorough about that. Doors on the long-term care floor stayed closed unless she had a reason to open them. She pushed the door fully open and looked inside. The bed had been adjusted. The head of the bed was elevated, as though someone had raised it to a sitting position. The sheets were slightly disturbed, not dramatically, not like someone had slept in them, but subtly, like someone had sat on the edge. She got another nurse, a woman named Denise, and they checked the room together. Nothing under the bed, nothing in the bathroom, nothing in the closet. They lowered the bed back to flat, straightened the sheets, and left. Brianna made sure the door was firmly closed. When she passed the room an hour later, the door was open again. After that, Brianna began paying very close attention to room 412. She would check it on every round. And over the following 2 weeks, she documented what she found.
The television glow, the bed position changing, the door opening. Once a water glass appeared on the bedside table, a glass that hadn't been there before and had no business being there. She also started noticing something else, something she was reluctant to talk about. She said that sometimes, when she was doing her rounds in the very early morning hours, around 3 or 4 a.m., she would walk past the closed door of 412 and hear something from inside. Breathing. Slow, steady breathing, the kind a sleeping person makes. She would open the door. The room would be empty. She brought this to the floor supervisor, who did not dismiss her, but also did not have an explanation. The room remained unoccupied. Brianna was told that if it continued, they would document it and involve the facility manager. It did continue. The last incident happened about 6 weeks after Mr. Greer's death. Brianna was passing 412 on her 2 a.m. round when she heard something different from inside. Not breathing. She stopped and listened. Someone was talking, a low, murmuring voice, too quiet to make out words. She stood outside the door for a full 30 seconds listening. The murmuring continued. She pushed the door open. The room was empty. The bed was flat. The TV was dark. But the television, and she made a point of this, made very sure of this, the television had a smear on the screen, a fresh smear, like a finger had been dragged across the glass from left to right. She had checked the room 2 hours earlier. The TV screen had been clean. Room 412 was never reassigned during the remainder of Brianna's time at that hospital. She transferred to a different floor 3 months later and requested never to be assigned to floor 4 again. She never found out who or what had been in that room.
Story 4. Dead Air. This is the story of a man named Owen who worked the overnight shift at a small FM radio station in a rural county in Georgia. It was a one-person operation. He ran the board, queued up the pre-recorded segments, took occasional calls from insomniacs and truck drivers who wanted to hear a specific song. Quiet work, mostly just Owen, the microphone, and the long, dark hours. The station was in a standalone building at the edge of town, surrounded by pine trees. The nearest neighbor was a gas station a quarter-mile up the road that closed at midnight. After that, Owen was as alone as a person could be. He'd been working there for about 8 months when the calls started. The station had a standard call-in line for listener requests. The number was printed on the station's website. Anyone could call. Usually, Owen got a handful of calls per night. Someone wanting to hear a country song, someone requesting a weather update, the occasional wrong number. The first unusual call came on a Wednesday night in early March. Owen answered it the way he always did, gave the station name and his on-air name, waited for the caller to respond. Silence. Not dead silence. He could tell the line was open, could hear the faint carrier tone, could sense someone on the other end, but no words. "Hello?" Owen said. More silence. Then, very faintly, he heard something. It wasn't words. It was more like a sound, a single sustained note, almost like humming, but not quite. It raised every hair on his arms. He disconnected the call, figured it was a bad connection, or a kid playing around. The same number called back 11 minutes later. Owen almost didn't answer, but it was a slow night and he picked up. Same thing. Silence. Then that sound, that low, droning tone. He disconnected again and put the number on a blocked list. 3 nights later, a different number called. Unknown. Owen answered. This time, there were words. Not many, just a voice, and he described it as sounding flat, like someone speaking without any emotion whatsoever, almost mechanical. And the voice said, "You shouldn't be here at this hour." Then the line went dead. Owen sat at his board for a long time after that. He told himself it was a prank. Teenagers, someone who knew he worked nights and thought it would be funny to mess with him. He tried to move past it, but the calls kept coming. Different numbers, always in the deep hours of the night, between 2 and 4 a.m., always the same voice,
and always something similar. Short statements, quietly menacing, delivered in that flat, empty tone. I know what you play on Thursdays. I drove past tonight. Your light was on. You left the back door unlocked on Monday. That last one, that one broke him, because the back door to the station had been unlocked on Monday. Owen had forgotten to lock it. He'd realized it around 3 in the morning and gone back to secure it. He hadn't told anyone. He called the police. They took a report but said there wasn't much they could do about phone calls. They suggested he change his number, maybe get a camera for the exterior of the building. Owen got the camera. He also started parking his car directly under the exterior light. He became hyper-aware of every sound the building made at night. For 2 weeks, the calls stopped. He started to relax. Then, on a Tuesday night in April, the camera picked something up. He'd been reviewing the footage the next morning. He'd made a habit of checking it, and at 3:17 a.m., the parking lot camera, showed something at the edge of the frame, at the very boundary of where the light reached the darkness of the tree line. A figure, standing completely still, facing the building. Owen froze the frame and stared at it. It was impossible to make out details, just a shape, a human-shaped silhouette, standing in the darkness at the edge of the trees, perfectly still, for exactly the amount of time that the camera's motion sensor had captured, 11 seconds, before the sensor reset. When the camera captured the next motion-triggered clip, 4 minutes later, the figure was gone. Owen contacted the police again and showed them the footage. They came out, walked the tree line, and found nothing. No footprints, no evidence that anyone had been standing there. Owen gave his 2 weeks' notice the following day. He moved to a different city. He works days now. He hasn't worked a night shift since. But he told me that sometimes, late at night, when his phone rings from an unknown number, he doesn't answer it. He sits there and watches it ring, and he says he can feel, physically feel, that flat, empty presence on the other end of the line, waiting.
Story 5. The Warehouse on Kellner Road. This one took me a while to get out of the person who lived it. His name is Danny, and he was 22 when he took a warehouse job to put himself through community college, 3rd shift, midnight to 8 a.m. The warehouse handled furniture distribution, big, cavernous building full of wrapped pallets and floor-to-ceiling shelving units. He worked with a crew of about 6 people on his shift. The warehouse on Kellner Road had a reputation, apparently. Among the workers who'd been there a while, it was understood that you didn't walk the far northeast corner of the warehouse alone. Danny heard this on his first night, delivered as a throwaway comment by one of the more senior guys, a man named Hector. Danny asked why. Hector just shrugged and said, "You'll figure it out." Danny was not the type to take that kind of thing seriously. He was practical, skeptical, not particularly imaginative. He filed it under workplace superstition and moved on. About 3 weeks in, he was doing an inventory count in section NE7, which was, he realized, right in that northeast corner, when he noticed a smell. "It's hard to describe the smell," he said. "Not rot, exactly. Not anything organic. More like a mineral smell, heavy and cold, like wet concrete that's been sealed over and hasn't breathed in decades. It was strongest near the base of shelving unit NE7C, a massive steel rack that went all the way to the ceiling. He mentioned it to Hector the next day. Hector's expression changed in a way that Danny couldn't quite interpret. "Don't stand near that rack," Hector told him. "Just don't." This, obviously, made Danny want to understand what was going on even more. He started quietly investigating, talking to some of the older workers, doing some searching online about the building's history. What he found wasn't spectacular or dramatic. No murder, no tragedy he could confirm. But what he did find out was that the building had been constructed on land that had previously been used as a county-contracted burial site in the early 1900s. Not a cemetery in any formal sense, more of an unmarked lot used for indigent burials, the kind of thing that got quietly discontinued and quietly forgotten. The city had certified the land as clear before construction, But the construction crew, according to a local newspaper article Danny found from 1987, had encountered what one worker described as unexpected remnants during the pouring of the foundation in the northeast section of the building. The article was vague on details. The project had continued. Danny didn't share this with anyone at work. He wasn't sure how to bring it up. But shortly after he found the article, the experiences escalated. He was alone in Section NE for an inventory check. His shift lead had assigned him solo to the area, which he later found out was unusual, that normally they sent people in pairs, when he heard something from above, from the top of shelving unit NE7C. A shifting sound, like weight redistributing, like something adjusting itself on top of the rack 16 feet above the warehouse floor. He looked up. He couldn't see anything. The top of the rack was in shadow, the overhead lights not quite reaching. He stood very still and listened. The shifting sound again, slow, deliberate. He left the section immediately and didn't go back alone. But the thing that Danny remembers most, the thing that he says he will carry with him for the rest of his life, happened about a month later. He was pulling a late inventory run at the end of his shift, and he made a wrong turn with his electric pallet jack by accident, ending up in Section NE by accident. He was turning around to leave when he saw them. Down at the base of shelving unit NE7C, pressed against the concrete floor, were handprints. Not one or two, many. Pressed in a thin layer of dust on the floor, as though someone, or several someones, had been crawling from the direction of the wall toward the center of the warehouse. The handprints were small, too small for adults. He stared at them for a long time. Then he raised his eyes slowly and looked at the wall behind the shelving unit. At floor level, where the wall met the concrete, there was a crack. A long vertical crack, the kind old buildings develop over time. And from inside the crack, faint, almost inaudible, barely there, came the smell. That cold, mineral smell. That smell of something that had been sealed for a long time. Danny pulled out his phone and took photos. He went straight to his shift lead and showed them. The shift lead went pale. He told Danny he'd report it to management. He told Danny to go home. When Danny came back the next night, the crack had been patched, fresh sealant, same color as the wall, applied carefully, like someone had done it quickly but precisely. Nobody spoke about it. Nobody ever spoke about it. Danny lasted another 2 weeks before he found another job. He still has the photos. He's never shown them to anyone outside of a small group of people he trusts. He doesn't know what was behind that wall. He says he doesn't want to.
Story 6, 3 a.m. at the Stop and Save. The last story tonight comes from a woman named Petra. She was 19 when she took a job at an all-night convenience store to help cover rent while she went to school. The store was in a mid-sized city, in a neighborhood that was, her words, not the safest but not the worst. The building had been a gas station in a previous life, and the layout still felt like one. Big glass windows on every side, a few rows of shelves, a service counter with bulletproof plexiglass. Petra worked the graveyard shift, midnight to 6, usually alone, which was fine by her. She was studying for her business classes in between customers, which were sparse, a few regulars, the occasional stranger. The stranger who changed everything showed up for the first time on a Thursday in late November. He was a tall man, middle-aged, with a gray jacket and no particular physical characteristics that stood out. He came in at exactly 3 a.m., Petra remembered because she'd just looked at the clock, and walked slowly up and down the 2 aisles without picking anything up. She watched him through the plexiglass. He came to the counter. He didn't buy anything. He just looked at her through the scratched plastic and said, "You work here alone?" Petra said yes before she could stop herself. The man nodded slowly. He looked around the store. Then he said, "That's not smart," and walked out. She watched his car leave the parking lot. She couldn't see the plates. The angle was wrong. The lighting was bad. She told herself it was nothing. A weird guy. The city had plenty of weird guys. She called her manager anyway, who told her to keep the door locked and only open for customers who buzzed the intercom,
Standard protocol she'd been slacking on. The following Thursday, at exactly 3 a.m., the man came back. Same gray jacket, same slow walk up and down the aisles. He came to the counter again. This time he said, "You remembered to lock the door." He smiled, then he left. Petra's hands were shaking when she called her manager. Her manager took it more seriously this time and filed a report with the store's corporate security team. They reviewed the camera footage. They confirmed the man had been there on both nights, but the cameras hadn't captured his plates, and his face was too obscured for an ID. Security told Petra to call 911 immediately if he came back. He came back the following Thursday, 3 a.m. This time he didn't come inside. He stood in the parking lot under the fluorescent lights and looked at the store. He stood there for exactly 4 minutes. Petra timed it, watching the clock, watching him, phone in her hand ready to dial. He looked at the building the way you look at a problem you're working out. Calm, patient. Then he got in his car and drove away. Petra called 911. Officers came and checked the area. Nothing. For 2 Thursdays after that, he didn't show up. Petra almost started to feel normal again. Then he came back, and this time something was different. He pulled into the parking lot at 3 a.m. as always, but instead of coming in or standing outside, he parked his car at the far edge of the lot, at the edge of the light, and turned his headlights off. And he sat there. Petra watched him through the glass. He didn't get out. He didn't move. He just sat in his dark car and watched the store. She called 911. While she was on the phone with the dispatcher describing the situation, the car's interior light briefly clicked on as he opened the door. Just for a second, just enough for her to see him clearly for the first time. He was looking directly at her, and he was holding up something small and flat, pressing it against his car window toward her. It was a photograph. She couldn't see what was in the photograph from that distance, but he held it there, pointed at her for a long moment. Then he got out of the car and began walking toward the store. The police arrived in under 4 minutes. By the time they pulled into the lot, the man was gone. His car was still parked at the edge of the lot. They ran the plates. The car had been reported stolen 3 weeks earlier from a county 2 states away. Petra quit that night. She never went back. The police followed up, but the man was never identified. She doesn't know what was in that photograph. She has theories, but she says she's glad she never found out for certain. She works days now. She leaves before the sun goes down, and she makes a point of it. Every Thursday at 3 a.m., she says she can't sleep. She lies there in the dark, and she thinks about that photograph pressed against a car window, pointed directly at her. She doesn't know why he chose her. She's just grateful he stopped. At least, she thinks he stopped. 6 people, 6 nights they'll never fully let go of. And the thing that gets me, the thing that I keep coming back to when I think about these stories, is how ordinary it all started. A job, a clock-in, an empty building, a quiet night, a routine they'd done 100 times before. And then something shifted. That's the thing about the dark. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come in dramatic, obvious ways. It creeps. It settles in at the edges, in the sounds that don't quite fit, in the things that are slightly wrong, in the feeling you get when you just know that something in the room has changed. These people trusted their instincts, eventually. Maybe that's the takeaway. Maybe the scariest thing isn't what's in the dark. Maybe it's how long we stand there telling ourselves it's nothing. Thanks for watching. Stay safe out there. And if you're heading into a night shift tonight, keep the lights on.